I think you know the move by now. You've probably seen it 100 times before. It's when somebody's life is falling apart and they can't keep telling themselves that same old story. And right on cue, at their lowest moment, a figure appears, offering them a pill, a truth. Swallow this, they say, and it'll solve everything. You'll see what's really going on. You'll stop being a sucker. You'll wake up. It's the Matrix, right? Oh no, it's worse. It's Total Recall.
Now this is the plan. Get your ass to Mars.
Because almost a decade before Neo woke up, bald, slimy, and extremely naked in a vat, Paul Verhoeven offered Arnold Schwarzenegger a red pill too. And he was doing something much philosophically nastier with it. Something that I think that we're still reckoning with today. But we'll get to that. Because in The Matrix, the pill pretty unequivocally works. It's horrifying, sure, but it works. It does exactly what Morpheus says it does. It tears away the illusion and shows Neo the real world. But in Total Recall, the pill might wake Quaid up, or it might put him back to sleep, or it might do something weirder still. That scene sits at the heart of the film, and it challenges everything Quaid and us, the audience, know up to that point. And maybe he's the hero, maybe he's in danger, maybe he's not. And the cure is to take that one little red pill. Take it, the man says, and come home. Problem solved. And now Quaid has to choose. No phone a friend, no 50-50, no Lawrence Fishburne selling the bejesus out of this new narrative. Just questions like, is it the truth? Is it a trap? Is Quaid a secret agent or a bored construction worker acting out on the fantasy he bought? Is he being manipulated? Is he dreaming? Is he already in that chair, quietly losing his mind? And then there's the question that I think really gets under the skin. Is he a hero because he's doing the right thing, or because it's his secret desire to be a hero? And that's exactly what he's paid for. That's what the audience of this fantastic, paranoid film, of course, based on a psychedelic Philip K. Dick story, have been arguing about ever since. And it's also why I think Total Recall feels so horribly like right now. Because Quaid has to make his choice, clock ticking, in a world where every story has at least some evidence for it, where every story has also a plausible counter story, and where every single person he meets is selling him something because they want something from him. And Quaid makes his choice, watching a single bead of sweat run down the side of a man's face. Now, is that sweat proof? Is it real fear leaking through the act, the tiny human detail that proves that Edgemar is lying? Or is it the opposite? A perfectly reasonable response to a crisis where the stakes are just life and death and he's just trying to help? We can't tell, and that's the point. Because the red pill doesn't solve the crisis, it is an essential part of the crisis. It shows up dressed as something like medicine, or as the truth, or as a clean way out, the sunglasses that finally show you what's really going on. And the film makes it impossible to know whether that exit leads out of the lie or deeper into it. Which is why, for my money, this should be the more famous red pill scene. The Matrix gives us the comforting version. It gives us the hard truth, the simple awakening, and a welcome to the desert of the real. But Total Recall gives us the messy version, the version we actually live with. It's the original red pill, and for my money, it's still the best. Plus, everyone these days seems to be selling some pill of one colour or another. But hold that thought too, because we'll come back to who's pushing the pills and why in a minute. Because now I have to tell you the price, right? You knew it was coming. Nothing in this life is free, and not even the air on Mars. Yes, to understand what Verhoeven has actually built here, we need to look at the one philosophy that explains why these crisis moments feel so good and go so wrong, why the escape hatch keeps appearing, and why we keep reaching for it even when we're fairly sure it too might be a trap. Unfortunately, it's the most hated philosophy of all. Yes, it's postmodernism. So let's take a look at Total Recall, at postmodernism, and at the trap we're all stuck in on the latest episode of Philosophical Film Club. Look, everybody hates postmodernism almost as much as audiences love Total Recall and Arnie. I'm a professional philosopher who specialises in postmodern philosophers. I wrote my PhD thesis on some of them, for goodness sake, and even I don't like postmodernism. But I promise, oh boy, that's the sound of somebody selling something, isn't it? But nevertheless, I promise that by the end of this video, you might find postmodernism interesting and perhaps even useful, even if you're not a huge fan of it, because it does have its diagnostic uses. First First, though, it may have been a while since you've seen Total Recall, or perhaps it passed you by altogether. That's fine. And as always, I encourage you to go away and watch the film because it's a blast and it really does fly by. But for those of you who want to quickly get up to speed, here's what happens. The movie centres on Douglas Quaid, a man with a beautiful wife, Sharon Stone no less, and a perfect marriage, who digs holes for a living. At least I think that's what he does. He's a regular guy, albeit with a fantastic life, but he keeps having the same dream of Mars and of a mysterious woman. He desperately wants to go there, but his wife is not having it. So Quaid books in a session with the latest innovation in vacations, Total Recall, where instead of going to the great expense of travelling to far-flung destinations, they'll just implant the memory of you having already been on that adventure and Bob's your uncle. Quaid immediately buys what the shady Total Recall salesman McLean is selling. He even opts for the secret agent fantasy package despite the cost, which causes a problem because it turns out that Quaid already is a secret agent who has worked on Mars and, unbeknownst to himself, is now in deep cover. So Total Recall, the company's solution to this bow-dropping revelation and being accidentally involved in an interplanetary conspiracy, is to just wipe Quaid's memories and send him on his way in a taxi, satisfied customer or not. Which turns out is a bad idea because things fall apart for Quaid pretty quickly after that. Firstly, he remembers he's being conned. Secondly, his work colleagues, also undercover agents, try to kill him. Then his wife turns out to be working for the baddies, and heavy hitters working for the Martian dictator Cohagen turn up. Quaid gets his old spy tools back, courtesy of a conveniently timed friend, and a video of the man Quaid was, Hauser, telling him to get to Mars and to blow up this whole conspiracy, which conveniently runs through Venusville, a seedy Martian underbelly full of sex workers, double agents, rebels, and the mysterious woman that Quaid has been dreaming about, Melina. It's clear that the powers that be want him dead, so Quaid helps the rebels, leading him directly to Cohagen, the big bad of this setup and basically the Emperor of Mars, who has used Quaid to flush out the rebels and finally end them. The secret at the bottom of everything is classic Philip K. Dick, even though he didn't write this bit, mainly a giant Martian terraformer discovered by Cohagen, Hauser and co, and covered up because it would make Mars livable, breathable, and most importantly, free for everyone. Cohagen, well, he has a business to run, and unfortunately for him, Quaid makes the choice to be the big damn hero and to get the alien tech running just in time, disposing of Cohagen in the process. When you think about it, it really is that classic Philip K. Dick type story of man meets woman, man forgets woman, society collapses, no one can breathe, woman saves man saves Mars, man is hero and gets the girl, that kind of thing. Which is where the inevitable twist comes in, this time courtesy of director Paul Verhoeven and his co-writers, because doesn't that plot sound exactly like the kind of thing you get in a B-grade memory implantation package? Yes, Verhoeven and co were doing it decades before Christopher Nolan even tried. He never tips his hand in the movie itself, but it's also just too plausible or too possible that everything is the dream, the exact dream that Quaid just paid for. And Quaid is, at the bottom, maybe still just a boring old Quaid after the credits roll. It sparked years of debate for and against, like these twists often do, usually in internet forums, but the idea is always the same. It's that wilderness of mirrors where you can't believe your lying eyes and where everyone is motivated to make you look the other way. It's enough to make your head spin, which in itself is a pretty good definition of the postmodern condition. So first, we'll get into that, what the postmodern condition is and why Total Recall seems to embody it so well. Then secondly, we'll dive into the real sting in the tail here. Is Quaid a hero, or is he just playing at being a hero because it's his deepest desire? And this intersects with the problem of wanting to be something in a world that is constantly trying to sell you on being certain somethings, often for their own purposes. Then we'll get into the heart of the matter. Number 3, how do we find truth when nothing seems to be true? And we'll look at a philosopher whose life's work was turned against him by the very conspiracy theories he was trying to defeat. And fourthly, and finally, I won't leave you stranded. The credits won't just roll. We'll talk about what now. Given all of this, what do we do? And surprisingly, philosophers, even postmodern ones, have some pretty good answers for surviving and even doing what's right in a post-truth world. But first, we ask the most important question of our marketing age. Who's sponsoring this? Because as Douglas Quaid navigates his way through the film, he stands, or perhaps he runs, fires and shatters his way through a giant X-ray screen. He does all of that at an intersection of different competing stories. And the most interesting thing about that for me, and in the film I think, is that there's often someone who really wants him to take up and adopt each of those stories. For example, there's Laurie's story, where she tells Douglas, hey, you're my husband, you're happily married and content, we'll vacation everywhere else this year except Mars, I promise. Then there's Recall's story of, hey, bored and impoverished consumer, want to live a completely different life that we can sell to you with no money back and no guarantees? And then there's the Ghost of Christmas Houses with the story of, hey, you're me and I'm an arsehole and I want my body back. Or there's Cohagen's story, hey, you work for me, and the Rebels story, you should be fighting for us, and Edgemar's story, this is all a dream, and so on and so on and so on. Quaid stands at the intersection of all of these stories, unable on any level to sort them out because it seems that behind every narrative he may adopt, there's someone who benefits. And that sounds pretty familiar, doesn't it? A story is a kind of identity. It's something we tell ourselves. In fact, it's often how we reinforce our identities, the stories we tell ourselves, but it's often also how we put ourselves on rails too, headed to what seems like an inevitable conclusion because, hey, that's how the story goes. Throughout the film, the implicit question Quaid seems to be asking starts out as, which one of these is true? But then it kind of morphs into, how do I break out of these things, these outcomes that others want me to head towards? And this is where the postmodern condition comes in, as promised, or dreaded. Because if you've read the Philip K. Dick story that this is based on, We Can Remember It For You wholesale and think that story was weird, well, this gets even weirder. But also like, hype and subscribe because next week we'll be doing that story on the channel. Because postmodernism comes from a Canadian government report. Yes, you heard that right. A government report, and of all places, Canada. Quebec, in fact, in 1979, which I think is still a part of Canada. Can somebody go and check on that, please? But in 1979, the French philosopher Jean-François Lyotard wrote a report on the state of human knowledge and the influence of technology on it for the Council of Universities in Quebec. And it kind of caught on. It's one of the places where the term postmodern originates, at least in its current broad and philosophical usage. Lyotard argued that we have gone through the death of what he called grand narratives, because time after time, too many of them turned out to be bullshit. Or perhaps more kindly put, no one grand narrative told the whole story, and they tended to be a little selective about how they portrayed things. Plus, they seemed to always have an interest in telling a story a certain way. And significantly, a lot of these grand narratives were attached to institutions, to the church, say, or the party, the nation, capital S, science, or capital P, progress, or a specific ideology. He found that because of technological progress in communication, mass media, artificial intelligence, yes, even back then, and other innovations, we now have access to even more knowledge and views on that knowledge than at any other point in human history, which is great, but also, as I'm pretty sure you know by now, also means that we can drown in it. The facts are abundant, but the interpretations are everywhere too, constantly rearranging themselves. And we have access to them, which is great. We can engage in critique and understand where these narratives have gone wrong or aren't telling the full story. But it also bred a dark side. Distrust and conspiracy, which we'll get into in a minute as well. But this, remember, is 1979, before we even get to the problem of deception and the manufacturing of fake truths and all of that stuff. So all these narratives and institutions, they don't go away, but now they have to compete. They have to persuade, they have to sell, and that's an essential part of Lyotard's diagnosis of postmodernity, the competing narratives, the feeling of constantly being sold something on all sides, and the inability to determine what is true. It might seem obvious to you today, but remember that he was writing this in 1979, again in a government-commissioned report in Canada. So that is the diagnosis of the postmodern condition. And Quaid's desperate situation is just the audience-friendly, action-packed version of it that we get on an intuitive level, really. Verhoeven even admits that this was his intention in an interview, to create this sense of unreality and competing interpretations, saying, quote, "We worked very hard to make both interpretations consistent and that both would be true." So ironically, the debate and counter-debate about the film amongst fans, whether the narrative was really happening to Quaid or not, that was baked in from the start. And the double irony is that some on the internet debated this so hard that they started treating the facts of the film as real. Not in that they really happened in actual history, because of course not, but still as some sort of evidence of some sort of truth, something that could be considered in the courtrooms of their arguments, which I think we can all agree is weird. It is so consummately postmodern, and I should point out that no one's happy about this. No one actually likes alternative facts and not knowing what is true and whether you can trust a grey-suited man with a red pill. No one's thrilled about this. Well, except maybe the Cohagens of the world who can make a bit of money out of it. But it's just where we are, was Lyotard's point. And I suspect it's also Verhoeven's point too. Because postmodernity and the postmodern condition is not a philosophy that's meant to be liked. Just like your doctor isn't a huge fan of measles, for example. It's because postmodernism is a diagnosis. It's diagnosing the crisis of meaning at the core of where we are, of civilization, of the stories we are sold about it versus what it really is. And at bottom, no one's really happy about it. But also once you know it, you can't unknow it or unsee it either. There's kind of no going back to a golden age narrative. That's a bit of a trap too. But if we want to do something about it, just like Quaid wants to do something about the rot at the core of his world in Total Recall, then we do have to come to terms with all of this. And what on Mars does that look like? So there's a lot of narratives competing, all trying to sell us something. So far, so obvious. But why would we want to buy them? And this is where there's a touch of genius in Total Recall, in Verhoeven's version and in Dick's original too, because it all comes back to Douglas Quaid and what he wants. He wants to be the protagonist of his own life, not just a participant in it, the hero of his own story. And look, I think we all want that on some level. But the film is even sharper when we look at what Quaid buys and how McClane sells it to him.
Could I ask you just one question, though? What is it that is exactly the same about every single vacation you have ever taken?
I give up.
You. You're the same. No matter where you go, there you are. It's always the same old you. Let me suggest that you take a vacation from yourself. Why go to Mars as a tourist when you can go as a playboy or a famous jock or...
Secret agent. How much is that?
Let me tantalize you. You are a top operative, back under deep cover on your most important mission. People are trying to kill you left and right. You meet this beautiful, exotic woman.
Go on.
I don't want to spoil it for you, Doug, but you rest assured, by the time the trip is over, you get the girl, kill the bad guys, and save the entire planet. Now you tell me, isn't that worth a measly 300 credits?
And so Total Recall's whole product is the promise of being somebody else for a while. And when Quaid hesitates, McClane doesn't reassure him that the memories will be real, he upsells him. Why not be a secret agent while you're there? Now, is McClane lying? Not exactly, which is the critical thing that pulls all of this together. Because there's a philosopher who drew this exact line in a little book with the greatest title in modern philosophy. It was Harry Frankfurt in his magnificent On Bullshit. And Frankfurt's distinction is simple. Once you've got it, you'll start seeing it everywhere. A liar, he says, still kind of respects the truth. A liar knows what's true and works to hide it. But the bullshitter doesn't care. Either way, doesn't even notice. Truth, falsehood, whatever, it doesn't matter to him. What matters is the effect. He says whatever works, whatever will get him the sale or what he wants. And in a film full of double-crossing bullshitters, McClane is the purest bullshitter in the film. He doesn't need the memories to be real. He needs them to be sold. Quote, as real as any memory in your head. It's such a classic bullshitter sentence, built so that nothing could ever prove it wrong. But the bullshit is really only the half of it. The other half is why it works on Quaid specifically. And for that, Frankfurt has a second really brilliant idea, one that's even more useful in understanding where we are in the postmodern condition and where it's taken us. Frankfurt argues that we don't just have desires, we have desires about our desires. He calls these second-order desires, and he thinks they're actually close to what makes us actual persons, rather than, just bundles of appetite or something. A junkie wants the drug. That's a first-order desire. But he might also want to not want it. That's the second-order desire. A desire about the kind of person that he wishes he were, the kind of desires he wished he had as a person. The one that comes disguised as a wish or even a dream of who they could be. And this is the hook that Recall sets to catch Quaid. He doesn't just want to go to Mars. That's the holiday. That's the first order want. What he really wants is to be the kind of man who belongs on Mars, a man of consequence, a man whose dissatisfaction with his life wasn't just ordinary boredom, but a sign of some buried, heroic destiny. He wants to be a wizard, Harry, and not just an ungrateful boarder under the stairs that keeps complaining. McClane's Why Not Be a Secret Agent aims straight past the holiday and hits that second-order desire. So Quaid isn't buying a trip, he's being sold a better version of himself. And something about that should make us uneasy, because that's a flashing red light at the back of the brain. Buyer beware, and it works pretty well on the obvious stuff. Offer me a free holiday or a too-good-to-be-true deal, and I start hunting for the catch, the monkey's paw, the cursed wish. We're really pretty good at spotting when a thing is being oversold or too good to be true. But here's the evolution of that sell, the way they've evolved to get around us. Here's what I think Frankfurt adds to Lyotard's diagnosis and what Total Recall lays bare years ahead of its time. The narratives competing for us, for our attention, with all of their vested interests, have gotten very, very good at selling. And they found a new premium product. Not a thing, not an experience, not a first-order desire. They're selling an identity. The promise of a new self, a different person, one that rearranges the very core of your being and finally makes you happy, a second-order want or desire. And that sell often slips right past the alarm, doesn't it? Because it doesn't feel like you're being sold to. A new pair of shoes feels like a purchase. A new you feels like waking up to who you really were all along. And that's the second order desire at work, the want beneath the want. And it's almost impossible sometimes to be a skeptical consumer of it because the product is you. It is the consumer. The red pill is the product and the product is you. And I think we can feel wait a minute, that this produces everywhere now, because we are actually starting to become a bit allergic to it. It's part of why so many people have an allergic reaction to identity being the thing on offer, a party or whomever selling you that and belonging instead of politics, or a movement selling you a self instead of an argument, which again is a whole wilderness of mirrors, and the film knows it too. By the end, Quaid is fighting alongside holographic copies of himself, funhouse reflections in a Martian shootout, and Cohagen can't tell which Quaid is which. But by that point, neither can Quaid. Because now we're at the heart of the crisis and the confusion. There are narratives and boxes certain interests want to put us in. A hero who can't even be sure if what he wants and who he wants to be is real and true or good. Yes, I get it. This is why people hate the analysis that postmodernism has to offer and would rather look away. But ironically, this time, facing up to the reality of the condition is not taking the red pill, just like Quaid does, and remaining on alert, even when those identity slippers fit us just so snugly and so comfortably. But that sounds exhausting, doesn't it? That constant vigilance required to not fall for the fake news, to not trust the wrong people, to not take the wrong pill and end up deep into another lie. It's the exhaustion that would almost radiate off Quaid's character if it weren't for Arnold Schwarzenegger's seemingly infinite arsenal of energy and, ammo. But that constant paranoia that the postmodern condition seems to require, that constant bewareness, isn't that also a trap? Well, yes. Yes, it is. And to see how, we have to talk about where all of this suspicion leads. Because the postmodern condition and conspiracy theories are not just distantly related, they're basically the same family. And it starts in a good place. It really does, because when the grand narratives lose their authority, when you can no longer just trust that a story is right because it's the official one, well, then somebody has to start asking questions. Philosophers call this critique, and it is our bread and butter. It is our reason for being. But as we'll see, it doesn't always turn out well for us. Yes, somebody has to look at Cohagen's tidy version of Mars and say, hang on, who benefits from this? What's being covered up? That instinct is healthy. It's how we catch a lie. The official story on Mars, for example, is a lie and Quaid's right to distrust it. Critique, at its best, is part of the immune system of a society that stopped taking power and authority's word for things. But an immune system with no off switch also eventually starts attacking the body, if you'll excuse the stretched metaphor. Because question the official story sometimes has no built-in brake, right? It slides almost imperceptibly from something like this dominant narrative is hiding something to every narrative is hiding something. And from there to, therefore, any alternative narrative is as good as any other, which, remember, Frankfurt is the territory of the bullshitter. They've stopped caring about whether the counter story is true. They only care what it does. And here's the dark turn. I think it's the one that Total Recall was also trying to warn us about, because that curdled suspicion isn't just a private error. You know, a friend who talks too much about chemtrails or something. It's useful and it's productive because a population primed to distrust every official story, one that is always hungry for the hidden truth, whether there is one or not, is always flattered by the sense that they alone can see it. That's not a problem for a certain kind of power or politics, as I think we've seen. That's a resource. That's a constituency that you can feed and direct and harvest. You don't suppress the conspiracy theorist in that kind of power game. You give them a conspiracy, which is exactly what Cohagen does to Quaid.
Well, my boy, you're a hero.
Fuck you.
Huh? Don't be modest. Quato is dead. The resistance has been completely wiped out, and you were the key to the whole thing.
He's lying.
You two-faced bastard.
You can't blame him, Angel. He's innocent. You see, Quaid, none of my people could get close to Quato. Fucking mutants could always sniff us out. So Hauser and I sat down and invented you, the perfect mole.
In the film, it's a twist and it's tragic. Quaid has done everything that he thinks is right. He's exposed the conspiracy and he's fought back. And he plays exactly into their hands. And this happens to us too as well. Yes, a philosopher watched this exact horror unfold too. Not in a film, but in his own life's work. Bruno Latour spent decades as one of the great critical thinkers, and critique was his trade. It was don't accept the official account, ask who benefits, show how the facts were assembled, and whose interests they served. It was noble work, and frankly, how you expose a Cohagen. Then around about 2004, Latour stopped for a minute and noticed who'd started taking up his tools. It was people like climate deniers, calling environmental science a constructed narrative serving a hidden agenda. There were conspiracy theorists who were, quote, doing their own research and asking who really profits. The precise moves that he'd spent a career sharpening were being turned against a whole range of small s scientific facts and narratives, and in some cases by the powerful against certain companies and interests against the vulnerable, which is backwards from everything that Latour felt his critique was for and showed. He wrote a pretty impassioned essay on this with a title that really sounds like a man with his head in his hands, gripping his hair going, why, called Why Has Critique Run Out of Steam? And his conclusion is a pretty familiar one. It's the one that Total Recall dramatizes. Suspicion, once you cut it loose from any discipline of evidence or rigor or reasoning or anything like that, has no destination. It can't deliver you to the truth because it's dissolved the very idea of a fact that could settle anything. Every claim is just somebody's agenda now, so nothing is safe. What it delivers you to instead is a man at the bottom of the hole, certain that he alone has seen through all of it, getting more and more certain and more flattered the deeper that person digs. And that certainty is worth a fortune to whomever wants that hole to be dug or that man to keep digging. And if you think this is an abstract worry, look at the symbol we've leaned into this entire video, the red pill. When The Matrix gave us that image, it meant waking up to a painful reality. And the directors meant it as something close to seeing your own true self at last in your relationship to the world. But within a few years, the term had been lifted by the manosphere, then the men's rights crowd, then the wider online right, until getting red-pilled meant waking up to their hidden truth about women, about race, about whatever the sheep were too asleep to see that week. It's the same image, the same structure exactly. The world lied to you. You alone can now see it. Welcome to Behind the Curtain. It's an emblem of liberation turned in under a decade into one of the most effective recruitment engines the internet has ever monetized. That is the critique run out of steam, live and in colour. It is Quaid's and Latour's dreams of a Martian sky turned into a nightmare. Except that it's ours too. And there's no Cohagen to walk in afterward and admit to the con. The pill that promises to wake you up is, far more often than anyone wants to admit, just the most comfortable way of getting back into that chair at recall. But all is not lost. Total Recall has maybe a happy ending, and maybe this video does too. You can find about it in the comments. The question is, where does all of this leave us? The official story lies, the counter story is a trap, your own suspicion can be farmed by the very people you're suspicious of, and the pill that's supposed to wake you up maybe just walks you back to the chair. So what's left? Is it just whatever you want to believe? Pick the story that flatters you the most? I think we'd be forgiven for landing there, right? A lot of people do. It's part of that exhaustion. But there's a philosopher who spent his last big book thinking about exactly this problem, and he refused to take the easy way out. The philosopher was Bernard Williams, and the book is Truth and Truthfulness. And Williams starts where we did, with the breakdown of grand narratives and the selling of truth. He definitely can't be accused of sneaking the old certainties through the back door like some philosophers attempt to. But then he acknowledges that we usually can't check whether a story is true, but he does ask, can we check anything about the people telling it? What's their deal? And he's on the lookout for what he calls two virtues in their storytelling. The first virtue is accuracy, which just means, did they actually try to get it right? Did they try to do the work to check the thing, even when checking was a pain in the butt and the comfortable answer was right there for the taking? And the second one is sincerity. Do they actually believe what they're saying? Or do they say whatever works, whatever sells, whatever recruits, whatever gets the result, which, as we now know, is just Frankfurt's bullshitter turned inside out. The bullshitter doesn't care if it's true. The sincere person is stuck with what they actually think, even when it's inconvenient. Now, the movie Total Recall is a fiction from top to bottom, but surprisingly, we can look for these virtues in that setting too. Because Recall, the company, sells meaning and doesn't really care if a word of it is real. No accuracy, no sincerity, just the sale. And Cohagen's story bends around whatever he needs in any given minute, classic villain style. Benny is running a whatever you say, sir act. Even Edgemar, who might be telling the truth, turns up at the perfect time and just wants Quaid to acquiesce. And then there's Melina and the rebels, who are not saints either, but are in a pretty verifiable life and death situation. People cannot breathe, and someone's hand is on that valve. That's a pretty difficult reality to skate around, within the film and elsewhere as well. I think it comes back to Williams' work, because quite a few sides are trying to spin things in their favour to convince Quaid, but one side is just trying to show, unadorned, and let Quaid decide what he thinks is right. It goes to the heart of Williams' virtues of accuracy and sincerity. So I think inadvertently, an unserious film and a wise book actually show us the way out of our postmodern wilderness. We can look for the truth unadorned, and we can often find it in those who can't breathe, who are just hanging on and who have no room for gain or for no advantage from spinning it. That's what Quaid does, whether it turns out to be real or not. And it says a lot about him, I think, as a person. It also harks back to Philip K. Dick's story and his great theme throughout his work of empathy. As we'll discuss in the video on that short story, many directors tried to make Dick's version of the film and couldn't get it to work, but Verhoeven sneaks it in, inside of a Hollywood blockbuster. Guato even gives it to us straight in the third act.
What do you want, Mr. Quaid?
The same as you, to remember.
But why?
To be myself again.
You are what you do. A man is defined by his action, not his memory.
Yes, the credits roll and the debates start in the comments section. Quaid never finds out whether he was the hero or the sucker. Neither do we. But he still gets to decide what to do next. And so do we. But that's it for this episode of Philosophical Film Club. So until next time, be wise and be kind, and maybe take that deep ocean vacation instead.